Hey, there's that cave logo we know and Capcom? Horizontal shooter? Yes sir, folks, this was the beginning of Cave's out-of-house development arc. As I mentioned in Chapter 5, Gwange was the last time Cave used their in-house boards, this time working with Capcom's beloved CPS2 hardware. This was the tech that's responsible for the Street Fighter Alpha and Marvel vs. series. But this wasn't the first time CPS2 has covered a shmup, as the absolute bangers like Mars Matrix and Giga Wing were also part of the CPS2 lineage. That being said, we are now treading new waters in the Cave discography. Thankfully, the level of quality is still here, and at one glance at the attract mode makes this completely apparent. The sprites are highly detailed as we come to expect from Cave. The setting this time contains steampunk and World War I influences. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this style was an inspiration to Jamestown's art design. This title screen is especially nice to look at with the newspaper headlines scrolling in the background. Good presentation overall. When you start the game, you have your choice between 2 pilots and 3 assist characters acting as your secondary gunner. If you've played Esperate or Gwange, you can tell by the character art that Junya Inoue is back at the helm. As we come to expect, each pilot and gunner has their personal quirks for varying playstyles. Ring has a wide shot, but is more on the slow side when it comes to movement. Bolt, on the other hand, has a focus-driven shot but plays faster. When it comes to gunners, Chain's specialty is using missiles. This is more of a straight shot and inflicts an average amount of damage. Nail uses cannonballs and, as you can imagine, is the most powerful out of the 3 gunners. It's a tad slower compared to the rest of the gunners' shooting rate. And finally we have Rivet. She uses heat-seeking missiles, but it's by far the weakest, the trade-off being its ease of use. And fun fact, if you hold in the start button, each character has an alternate costume. I'm not sure if this changes anything in the game, but hey, it's something. But before I get ahead of myself, who are these people? What are their motivations? Why are literal children engaging in fucking dogfights? The setting of Progear takes place in the Kingdom of Parts, a city that relies on wind-powered generators and electronic developments. Eventually, the Progear was created, a powerful device that produces limitless energy. This newfound knowledge was established to develop aircrafts and push the Kingdom of Parts into an advanced technological era. Naturally, with advancements that elevate man, it can be abused by tyrants, otherwise known as the Elders' Council. Their wealth granted them access to the Progear's power, which gave them immortality. Later, they publicly declared their intent to overthrow the government and establish a utopian society, introducing a new race of people and to re-educate the population to become familiar with their new world order. Well, the government of Parts can't have that and took military action, initiating a war between the adults and the Elders' Council. The Parts military was completely wiped out, leaving the fate of the future in their children's hands. This is where our protagonists currently stand. Thankfully, Rivet stumbled upon the Gunflyers, an experimental weapon their parents have left behind. This gunner attachment is what controls the plane's lock-on attack. With Ring and Bolt's aviation skills combined with Chain, Nail, and Rivet's assistance controlling the Gunflyers, the Kingdom of Parts may have a chance to be reclaimed. So, if you haven't caught on yet, the cast is literally named after hardware supplies. More specifically, things that keep objects together. You need a chain for your anchor to keep it grounded, a nail for a chair to keep it sturdy, a rivet for your rivet gun to completely decimate your enemies. Wait a minute. These symbolically coincide with the Gunflyer mechanic and the characters' relationships with one another. Yeah, I can tell a manga artist directed this. Holy shit. So I selected my loadout, the game starts, and you're greeted with a highly detailed animation of your plane launching into the sky as the characters' comrades wave their goodbyes. What a great start. You're now soaring the skies, and your enemies vary from planes, tanks, and zeppelins. The bullet patterns are pretty reasonable for the first stage. It's not easy enough to breeze through it, but it's enough to keep you focused and alert. By the end of the stage, you're greeted by great value George Washington and his massive zeppelin. I love the boss portraits before these fights start. Progear nails its presentation, and it's just loaded with detail. In fact, if you've played this a few times before, you can actually spot this boss hanging in the background when the stage starts. The devil's in the details, as they say, and it really makes these environments feel alive. I'm happy to tell you guys I did defeat this stage and Mr. Pench without losing a life, but we can probably attribute that to the fact that this isn't my first time playing Progear. I've replayed the first stage many times in the past, usually when testing out monitors and emulators on different platforms. But like clockwork, I would stop playing shortly after starting the second stage. I'm not sure why, maybe it wasn't high on my priority list to complete. Anyway, I'm here now to rectify that. Oh, that's why. The bullets have basically doubled since the first stage. Like, goddamn, we've barely started this game and we already have a slowdown. Speaking of, since slowdown happens a lot in Progear, now's a good time to explain this shmup staple. It's not uncommon for bullet hell games to come across slowdown. This usually triggers when there's multiple enemies, bullets, or both on screen. The frame rate literally dips as it's pushing the hardware to its limits. I'm sure PC Master Race stands are seething right now, but I'd ask for you to calm down for a second because this isn't exactly a bad thing. Slowdown considerably helps the player avoid these bullets. In fact, most of the time this is an intentional design choice by the developers. Funny enough, when these games get ported over to home consoles that actually have the power to handle these assets, fans get mad if slowdown doesn't occur like its arcade counterpart. This happened when Mushihime-sama and Ibarra were ported to the PlayStation 2. Mushihime-sama had half the amount of slowdown and Ibarra's slowdown was completely removed. Imagine all those bullets filling the screen and expecting the player to have the reflexes of a fly to dodge all of that at full speed. Bullet hell games are difficult by default, but even hardcore players understand that just sucks. Continuing forward, you face off Gabriel Hammer and his whale submarine mech. The designs of these boss vessels are consistently awesome. On stage 3, I think the environmental designer forgot to adjust the color balance. The shit is bleeding red. But hey, at least the contrast helps make the bullets more visible. But let's be honest, I'm still gonna get shot. It's clear at this point this game is progressively getting harder and the bullet patterns are getting trickier. What the fuck? Stage 4 switches it up and Cave decides to return to its roots. Sort of. We now have a horizontal shooter moving vertically? This is meant to force the player to hone their skills with their gunner, as your normal shot just shoots forward. This reminds me of Gwange Light. Progear was, after all, made after that title. You obviously don't have as much control as you did in Gwange, but what draws parallels are the obstacles that are limited to your avatar's trajectory. In layman's terms, use the gunner for hard-to-reach enemies, just like you did in Gwange with the Shikigame. This tactic is clearly meant to be exploited when you fight Slasher's Kraken airship, as you'll fly around the boss to avoid being hit. I really dig the deep blue night sky at the beginning of Stage 5. I really appreciate being treated to a lovely environment while I'm being completely fucking crushed by heavy artillery. As you can imagine, being the final stage and all, there's a lot of big ships and plenty of bullets to put you in death-defying positions. And I'll be honest, I started to become dependent on bombs. I used them semi-liberally in Stage 3, but I definitely started using them as a crutch by Stage 4 and 5. Eventually I reached Colonel Lionel here and bomb rushed the hell out of this fight, exploiting my infinite continues. This isn't my ideal strategy because there's nothing you can learn as a player using this tactic. But what the hell is this? Like most shmups, this fight has multiple phases, and if this is a title you want to master, this boss will push you to your limits. Once he's defeated, you're treated to a manga-style ending that's specific to the characters you've selected. The ending isn't all that different between the two pilots, as the ghosts of their dead fathers help the heroes escape the collapsing base. They really did just take a note from Star Fox 64.
Don't ever give up, my son. Father?
To be perfectly honest with you guys, after I completed Progear, I believe this was just a visually appealing title with B- gameplay. Movement kind of felt sluggish, and the gameplay seemed relatively generic. That is until I researched how to play the damn game. I went into Progear before understanding the ship characteristics and the scoring system. All I knew was the shmup staples. Rapidly press the fire button to attack with normal movement speed, hold down the fire button for a lock-on attack with slower movement, and that there is a dedicated button to use bombs. But after doing some research, this is what I gathered. When you destroy an enemy with a normal shot, bullets in its proximity are converted into rings. Attacking this way is referred as pilot mode. By using the lock-on shot, aka gunner mode, you can convert these rings into jewels by using the previously stated conditions. When you switch between shot styles, rings and jewels are automatically pulled into your plane. Jewels have higher point value than rings, and because you'll be naturally switching between pilot and gunner shots throughout this, the mechanic really goes hand in hand. So this time, I use Bolt as a pilot and Nail as a gunner. Combining speed and power creates a deadly force to be reckoned with. This loadout was much more effective than my first attempt, and understanding Progear's mechanics definitely elevated my experience. I, unfortunately, chose Ring and Rivet for my first run. So it was like attacking a fully armored military with confetti. I'm sure there's someone out there that can make this work, but I'm not that person. Progear is challenging despite the improved loadout, but I died less and managed to consume less bombs. And I know for a fact this is the case, because after this run I was able to enter my name on the ranking board. So after completing Progear for the second time and having a better grasp of the mechanics, what do I think now? I think it's marginally better than my last assessment, and I think we can chalk this up to this being Cave's first horizontal shooter. It's definitely a great start for a hori shooter, but even Ikeda had his qualms tackling this shift. So that begs a few questions. Why did Cave commit to this design? And for that matter, why did they stop using their in-house hardware? Why did they partner up with Capcom? Unfortunately, the bullet hell game genre was starting to decrease in popularity in this time frame, and with the Cave 6800 board slowly becoming obsolete, why would Cave want to spend money to produce outdated in-house hardware, or invest money in developing new hardware to a market that's not interested in their games? The safe route is to test the market by developing a game on popular pre-existing arcade hardware. That's where Capcom comes in. It wasn't powerful hardware. The CPS2 board was aging too. In fact, it was weaker than the 6800 board. But Cave didn't have to produce a board in a potentially dying market, and I believe that was the point, as Ikeda very much believed that Progear could potentially be Cave's last title. So Cave and Capcom came to an agreement and started development. However, this means Cave doesn't get the final say in what direction the game is going, because originally, Progear was going to be a vertical shoot-'em-up, and its working title was initially called Garden of Progear. But the Big C's team lead stated that title is a little too highbrow. When Inoue showed the team leads the vertical concept, they stated that a horizontal shooter would best fit the setting. Maybe it's not fair to compare the concept art to the final product, but I feel like I can see a larger scope of the world in a horizontal orientation. But this presented a few problems. 1. Cave never made a horizontal shooter before. 2. Cave devs were extremely unfamiliar with the CPS2 hardware. And 3. They only had 6 months to complete this game. In 2010, Ikeda was asked in an IG magazine interview to elaborate on Progear's developmental struggles. He responds, "So horizontal games usually make use of the landscape, right? We decided to get rid of that for Progear. We just straight up took the vertical shooter format and stuck it into a horizontal game. This turned out to not be the best idea. There were elements of the game's presentation that were difficult for the player to understand at a glance. Dodging bullets was already pretty hard in this format, so we wound up being unable to make this sort of edge-of-your-seat bullet patterns we wanted to." The interviewer also noted that the CPS2 hardware was, quote, "severely outdated as well." Ikeda laughs and replies, "Oh yes, it was really hard. We were all pretty distraught with it." Inoue expresses a similar sentiment in a 2001 Arcadia interview. "Well, there's only 16 colors per title, and when moving a lot of sprites, there's a lot of slowdown. Also, the pixels are non-square, height longer than width. So when you want to include a normal character drawing, it goes vertically. So supposing your character is going to be stretched, you first have to make revisions. The fact that it wasn't just drawing pictures was work. It was the first time I had done something like that, and considering that Capcom has been putting out their famous fighting game series on this hardware, goes to show their technical skills are amazing." Despite all of these hardships, Cave pushed through to meet the deadline, only for its release to be unexpectedly pushed out several months later. Even after developmental pains, Progear was still popular in arcades. It was ranked at 4th place in Game Machine magazine's popularity polls. Critics lauded the steampunk art style, but noted the music was subpar. The first stage's BGM is decent, but everything past that is pretty forgettable. Again, I would speculate this is due to the devs dealing with foreign hardware and the time constraints. There are other things I could pick apart as well. The bullet patterns, although tricky, doesn't have crazy patterns like they did in previous Cave titles. The American version of Progear had its Japanese voice acting cut. If I had to guess why, it was probably a localization choice. And to me, as much as I like the UI, aesthetic, and presentation of the game, the colors kind of look muted. That being all said, Progear is not a bad game. It's a shmup title that mechanically plays it very safe, with a beautifully presented world. Given the circumstance and limitations where Cave was as a company, Progear could have been a complete train wreck. And honestly, that just shows us the talent and adaptability Cave had as a team. Its style has been noted as influential for other games, such as Senemora and previously mentioned Jamestown, so clearly it had an impact in the shmup realm. You can actually pick up Progear as part of the Capcom Arcade Stadium bundle, and if you're short on cash, the app itself is free through the Switch, PC, PlayStation, and Xbox consoles, and you can buy the game itself as DLC for $2. Not bad. It's also available through the Mr. FPGA project thanks to Hotego, and there's always, of course, emulation. To Cave, Progear was the end of an era. Console gaming was popularized. In fact, arcade titles were being ported to consoles. On top of that, shmups in general have been slowly fading away from the public eye. It seemed like the end, really.